If I were going to start to make a biblical case for the full participation of women in the orders of the church, I think I would start in two places, one bit of Paul and one bit of John. I would start with Romans 16, where again and again there are women in ministry. There is this famous woman about whom a lot has been written, who some of you will know. Romans 16, people have often just sort of skipped over it, but actually it is fascinating. Junia, here she is in Romans 16, verse 7. And of course there are some texts which say Julia, and some have made Junius a man, but actually there is no evidence for a male name, Junius, whereas Junia is a well-known female name. And she goes with Andronicus in verse 7, and Paul says they are well known among the apostles, episemoi entois apostolos. And some people have tried to say that means they're well known to the apostles, but actually it's been shown quite recently that it cannot mean that. Junia she is a woman and she is an apostle. Just like Phoebe in verse 1 is a deacon in the church in Cenchreae, and she is the one who Paul has entrusted the letter to, and so on and so on. There's a lot of serious, hard-working Christian women in chapter 16, and I don't think they were just making the tea after the church worship service either. These are people who have worked hard in the Lord, and they're in, apparently, leadership positions. Just as in 1 Corinthians, people routinely come up with the passage in 1 Corinthians 14, which says women should keep silence in the churches, but that cannot mean that women cannot participate in leading worship, because in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul insists that when women are praying or prophesying in public, they should look like women, and Paul does not believe in a unisex ministry. I think that's what the stuff about the wearing of the veil and so on is ultimately all about, that they should appear as who they are, and not as sort of counterfeit men or whatever. Now, the other place I would go, and I'm doing this very briefly and off the top of my head, the other place I would go is John 20, where the first person to be commissioned to take the news of the resurrection of Jesus to others is Mary Magdalene. Now, that is so counterintuitive in the ancient world, in the ancient Jewish world, in the ancient pagan world. Here is the first person to tell someone else that Jesus is alive. And it's a woman, and not just any old woman, it's Mary Magdalene. And you can already see 150 years later, Celsus and others saying, well, there you are, this whole thing was just crazy women, getting silly ideas because they were paranoid and all the rest of it. And this is, as in Paul, God choosing what is weak to shame the strong. And it seems to me that in the resurrection, there is a radical reevaluation of the role of women. And it's the more interesting because in the official public tradition in 1 Corinthians 15, the women have been airbrushed out of the account. He died, he was raised, and then he appeared to James, Cephas, the 11, 500 once, and last of all to me. Well, hey, where are the women? Well, in the official tradition of the church already by the mid-50s, people are worried about them. But the early stories, which then get celebrated in the writing of the Gospels, the women are front and center. Apostolic ministry grows out of the testimony that Jesus is alive. That, to me, is, in the New Testament, is the basis of the apostolic ministry. And I cannot understand why that should be problematic if you're a biblical Christian. I can understand if you say that the Bible is a second-order thing and what matters is the tradition of the church, then yeah, fair enough. So I then insist on reading 1 Timothy 2 in the light of that. And if you want to know what to think about 1 Timothy 2, I suggest you go and read Paul for Everyone, brackets pastoral epistles, because it's kind of complicated. Do off the top of my head. But that's where I would start, with Romans 16 and with John 20.